What I'm going to do right now really quickly is to review the autonomic nervous system and how it fits into the entire nervous system so you have it fresh in your mind. Let's take the central nervous system to begin with. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. And then off of this central nervous system comes the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system can be divided into the afferent and the efferent portions of the peripheral nervous system. The afferent, A before E, the afferent comes into the central nervous system, bringing in the sensory impulses, and the efferent portion is the motor division. So the sensory or afferent portion is the portion of the peripheral nervous system that sends its information from the periphery to the central nervous system. For instance, the sensory division allows you to feel that object that's in your hand. And once again, that's not the portion of the nervous system that we're concerned with today. We're just trying to make sure that you have the overview in your mind. What we are going to be talking about today is a portion of the efferent nervous system, the portion that comes off of the central nervous system and goes out to the periphery. The efferent nervous system consists of the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic portion of the nervous system is the portion that we have control over, the portion that allows you to control your muscles. It allows you to pick up your pen, to move the muscles in your hand, to make a fist, and so forth. For the most part, we have voluntary control over that portion of the peripheral nervous system. But the portion of the nervous system that we'll be speaking about right now is separate. The autonomic nervous system is the portion of the peripheral nervous system that we have very little control over. So recall what the autonomic nervous system actually does. For instance, let's take your heart. The heart beats at an intrinsic rate. The heart is able to generate its own impulses, and even if you completely disconnected it from the brain, it would still beat at that intrinsic rate. And with the autonomic nervous system control over the heart, we can start adjusting the heart rate to suit our needs at the time. For instance, if you have a really good fright, the heart rate is going to be very different from that intrinsic rate, and that's largely due to the autonomic nervous system control over the heart. As the sympathetic nervous system is engaged, adrenaline will increase the heart rate and increase the contractility of the heart. Another example is the motility of the gastrointestinal tract. The GIT has an intrinsic rate of movement as well. There are cells of Cajal that determine how frequently the peristaltic contractions occur in the GIT. In that case, when we have a meal, our parasympathetic nervous system will send out acetylcholine, and that's going to be the stimulus to increase the rate of movement in the GIT and increase all secretions into the GIT. Remember, the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest portion of the nervous system. But then even if you've just eaten, if there's a sudden sympathetic nervous system stimulation, for instance, someone breaks into your home, the sympathetic nervous system will slow down the GIT because that fight or flight response will dictate that we won't spend our energy digesting food. So the autonomic nervous system is very important, and it's a portion of the nervous system that's going to regulate various organs to suit our needs at the time. And hopefully with that quick review, you've put that autonomic nervous system back into context with respect to the entire nervous system. Another thing that I'd like you to have fresh in your mind is the type of neurotransmitters that we use in the peripheral nervous system and the way that the neurotransmitters work so that we can apply that to our drugs that work on the neurons. In this next slide, we see neurotransmitters of the peripheral nervous system. The somatic nervous system, which innervates our muscles, uses acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. So for instance, if we're going to move our hand, the signal that allows our muscles to contract is the acetylcholine binding to the receptors in the neuromuscular junction. But let's go back even further so that you can picture what's happening. This diagram depicts a neuron transmitting its message to a second neuron. When the first neuron gets excited or depolarized, there's an action potential that goes down to the far end of the nerve, and that's called the neuron's end terminal. That action potential is the message for the synaptic vesicles that contain the neurotransmitters to fuse onto the neuron end terminal. And as that fusion occurs, there's a release of the neurotransmitters into that synaptic cleft. Those neurotransmitters have an incredibly small distance to diffuse across the synaptic cleft and bind onto the receptors of the next neuron. And as that neurotransmitter binds to the receptor on the next neuron, it's the signal to excite or inhibit the next neuron. And another thing to remember is that the neurotransmitters do not last in that synaptic cleft very long, because it'd be very dangerous if we kept sending messages to the next neuron. So we degrade the neurotransmitters at an incredibly rapid pace. Within about 3 milliseconds or 3/1000ths of a second, that neurotransmitter is being degraded. And you might be thinking, well, how is it that that degrades so quickly? Well, for acetylcholine, it's being degraded by the enzyme called acetylcholine esterase. And the acetylcholine esterase is an enzyme that splits the acetylcholine in half, and the resulting products have less than 1/10,000th of the action that it originally had. In the sympathetic nervous system, we have two different enzymes that break down the adrenaline. There's COMT and monoamine oxidase, which is abbreviated MAO. I'll be repeating all of the important things that you need to remember, so if you didn't catch all that, don't worry. This is just a review of the important facts that allow you to get a really good picture of the autonomic nervous system. So what I'm going to do right now is to go back to a slide that we've already seen and fill in a couple little things. The autonomic nervous system is interestingly different to the somatic nervous system. Recall that the somatic nervous system was a one neuron pathway. So from the central nervous system all the way to the effector, there's just one neuron. But the big difference in the autonomic nervous system is that it has a two-neuron approach to getting that message to the ultimate effector. In the sympathetic nervous system, we've got a ganglion that's really close to the central nervous system, while in the parasympathetic nervous system, that ganglion is much closer to the effectors.